Great. Okay. Well, hi, James. Obviously, extraordinary week for UK tax planners. LinkedIn is just completely full of the same subject. I'm sure you've seen it. You've never seen a news feed like it, right? On one topic. Extraordinary changes. And I think we did kind of predict this, didn't we, when we did our video? But I just wanted to hit you up and get your views on what's
Yeah,
actually.
yeah. Well, I guess the surprise was a few days ago when suddenly it was said that Jeremy Hunt was in fact going to abolish the non-dom regime, which clearly, a nakedly political decision, and also I think a sign of desperation. So I think Jeremy Hunt was clearly desperate to find some money. Thought it would irritate Labour, but I don't. I think if the Tories were in a better position and they thought they might win the next election, I don't believe they would have just done this in the way they've done it, because it's a bit. I mean, it's clumsy. It's not. It doesn't look great that they've just suddenly had this sort of complete volte-face on this. But we are where we are. Yeah, it seems like it's all due to come into effect April 2025, which is of course after the next election, which will be or any time before January 2025. It seems to be generally considered that these rules will go into legislation in the 2024 Finance Act. So it will all be there to come into effect in April 25. Labour don't seem to have raised any objections to it as such. They just said, "Oh, look, they've taken our policy." So it could be that Labour will now just let this flow. They'll say, "Okay, well, this is what we were planning to do. Now it's been done. Here it is." But there will be uncertainty until we see the Labour manifesto, until we know the results of the election, until we have next year's budget. There will be uncertainty, but clients will want to be planning in the meantime, because it's a dramatic change to the rules, which
Yeah.
are
What are the actual changes? What I understand, we're now taking our tax advice from Italy, of all places, which didn't have a non-dom regime, did it? But it had like what they call the neo-dom regime. So if you're new, you just pay a fixed amount of tax for a few years. And this, I think you see this in a place like Denmark, that it's almost a way of they just suck you in on a good deal, and then once you're trapped there, then the high rate goes up. But can you just say what exactly the UK are going to put in
Yeah,
place?
so the new UK regime is very simple. That for the first 4 years, you'll arrive in the UK, you'll have 4 years where any income and gains that you have outside the UK, they won't be taxed, but also, unlike at the moment, you'll be able to freely bring them to the UK and they won't be taxed. So I'm going to sort of call these, the honeymooners will be the people that can just come to the UK, and apart from money that they actually earn in the UK from employment or, income from UK assets, doing activity in the UK, they just have a complete free ride for 4 years, no tax. But then after 4 years, dramatically changes, and suddenly they're fully subject to tax worldwide, just as I am as a UK resident domicile person at the moment. So it's a very simple regime. It's quite a stark regime, and I think the issue is that it's not going to encourage long-term residents to think, okay, I'm going to set up my home in the UK for the long term, because it's all very well having this first 4 years, but then they're going to have to be comfortable with just paying full tax, which some people might be, some people won't. And I think that's kind of an aspect of it. It just hasn't. It's very blunt. Hasn't been. It'd be nice if there's some consultation. I think it's not. Some of the principles that are quite sensible, like getting rid of domicile being important, is purely based on residence. So it's if you've been non-residents for 10 years outside the UK, or at least 10 years, so you've never lived in the UK or you've been away for 10 years, then you can get this new 4-year treatment when you come back in. They haven't really said much about inheritance tax yet, but they've said they're going to look at inheritance tax and maybe move that on to a similar basis. I think the UK has quite an old-fashioned inheritance tax regime as it is at the moment, and it may even be that we move away from having so much inheritance tax. But because what people are saying at the moment is that when you come to the UK, they think that you're going to have 10 years where your non-UK assets are not within the scope of UK inheritance tax. But then after 10 years, your worldwide assets are within the scope of UK inheritance tax. But then also, if you leave, you'll have 10 years before you come outside the scope of UK inheritance tax. And that's a very long tail. So if you're a foreigner who moves to the UK for a few years, if then when you leave, you're going to have 10 years when the UK is in theory going to be coming after you for inheritance tax, that's not very attractive. So we'll see. Then there's a number of transitional provisions. So because it's coming in April 2025, and if you're already in the UK, but at April 2025, you will have not used up 4 years in the UK, then you can have a little bit of this 4-year period from April 2025 until you've done your 4 years in the UK. If you've already been in the UK a long time, then what you're faced with is that suddenly your worldwide assets will become subject to UK income tax and capital gains tax. So they're saying, firstly, in the first year, so 25, 26, your income tax on overseas income will have a 50% reduction. They're saying that you'll have an opportunity for a brief window, to bring in all your old foreign income and gains and just pay a rate of 12% tax on that. So some people will be looking to do that. And they're also saying that where you have assets offshore that you sell for a gain in the future, they will be rebased at their April 2019 value. So you'll just pay tax on increase in value since April 2019. So these provisions to soften the blow, and in the next year, people that are already here as res non-doms are going to be looking very carefully at what they should be doing to take advantage of those transitional provisions. Another aspect of that is up until April 2025, you will be able to set up an excluded property trust, which, as you know, is where a non-dom puts foreign assets in a trust, then they can be outside the scope of UK inheritance tax indefinitely, as long as they're foreign assets. So some people will be looking to do that. And then the other part of it is, at the moment, we have these protected settlements. So the last time the non-dom rules were changed, they said that, well, even after you've become deemed domiciled in the UK, or deemed domiciled in the UK, then where you have assets sitting in an offshore trust earning income and gains, those income and gains won't be taxed unless you receive benefits. So they're saying that in future, from April 2025, new income and gains in those trusts will be taxed on the settlor's residence in the UK. But obviously, the historic income and gains that are built up will only be taxed if you receive a benefit. But protected trusts are not going to be a sort of saving grace. So in the last changes, that was a bit of a loophole, that even though always people become deemed domiciled, they could put their wealth into these protected trusts, and then it could roll up tax-free in these trusts, as well as being out inheritance tax-free potentially. But that's not going to be the case with the new rules. It looks like you'll have the inheritance tax protection, but income and gains will just be attributed to a settlor in the UK. But I think as we talked about a couple of weeks ago, aside from these rules that I've just been describing and the sort of whole non-dom regime, there are lots of ways in which people can organise their lives in a tax-efficient way in the UK. And so that people will be looking at that, and things like insurance bonds, or being beneficiary of a trust that someone else has settled who's outside the UK, or receiving gifts, or just actually organising your investments so you're not realising a lot of income and gains, and you're just living off some pot of clean capital that you have somewhere, or your pension, or whatever it might be. So I think it's going to be an interesting year as people work out how these rules impact on them, and it'll be interesting to see what the market reaction of the globally mobile is to this new UK regime.
Okay, well, that's very interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think most people with assets, what they don't like is uncertainty. Actually, right? It's the uncertainty that spooks them. As you say, once you know what the rules are, then you can plan and work things out. But we've got an election going to come up in the middle of all of this, aren't we? So who knows what's going to happen? What's your feeling on what Labour would do when they inevitably come in with this?
I think Labour will broadly accept the regime that's being proposed by Conservatives. I think, although it's inconvenient for them in a way that this money which they'd had set aside for their spending plans has effectively been taken away and already put into the equation. It's been them being able to say, well, look, the Conservatives taken our policy, it's not a bad thing for them to be able to say. And then now actually they don't have the headache of having to worry about doing this themselves, and they don't have to fight a battle with the city and whoever about these rule changes because Conservatives have done it. So in some ways, it could be quite good for Labour to just say, okay, well, this is done. That was our idea. Let's get on with it. I mean, generally in the past, whenever there's been these changes, there's been some issues with the draft legislation that have needed to be worked out. So
you mean watering down, don't you?
Yeah. Well, sometimes just things that aren't clear or have unintended consequences. And then some things where there's some lobbying and pushback and it gets watered down. So yeah, there might be an opportunity in the next few months for some wriggle room. I think once it's been implemented under the current government, I don't think Labour will change what is implemented and planned in the short term. But it could be that as we've always seen the non-dom regime, and this is in some way a continuation of the non-dom regime, but just with dom taken out of it and residence put in its place, that we could see a further evolution in a few years. I think some of the principles of moving to residency-based rather than domicile is a good thing. It's more modern. I think also being in a situation where there is no longer a disincentive of bringing money to the UK is a good thing. So I think with those changes, it's quite a radical change, which has shifted the whole thing somewhere else. I don't think where it got to is necessarily perfect, but from where we've now got to, we could see further refinements and improvements in the future.
Okay, cool. All right, thanks, James. Thanks for that update. Well, I guess we'll see. I've no need to.
So I have one thing actually quite significant, is that it's interesting how this could affect Brits, because if domicile is no longer important, then if you've been a long-term British expat, then in theory, when you come back to the UK, you're going to be able to have this 4-year period.
Right.
So let's watch that space. Yeah.
Yeah, because that sort of returning dom rules were very complicated, weren't they? And yeah. Okay. So well, let's see what happens then. I guess no need to panic right now, and just to sort of just keep an eye on what's happening. But thanks for that. Very helpful.
Pleasure.
Cool.